All right, welcome to Legal Tech Week for October 30th, 2020. This is Bob Ambrogi. I am the moderator of the program. I write the blog LawSites and also have the podcast LawNext about innovation in law. And we have a little change to our lineup today. We have a guest joining us, Steve Embry. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Bob. Steve Embry. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. Practiced law with the MLaw 200 firm for a number of years, and then left to start publishing a blog called TechLaw Crossroads, which is about legal technology and legal innovation and disruption and anything else I want to write about, because it's my blog and I can do that. And so I'm looking forward to being a part of this.
And of course, you make a lot more money from blogging than you ever did at a big law firm, right?
Yeah, it is. I've noticed that.
And our other panelists this week, Nikki, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Nicole Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with MyCase practice management software. I write our regular columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, the Daily Record, and also a regular post on the MyCase blog. And I don't have anything funny to say. I can never think of funny things to say like some of you do. So I have nothing. I got nothing to add.
All right. That's okay. Victor, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Lee. I'm assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal. I cover the business of law, and that includes technology. And my standard disclaimer is I don't speak for the ABA or the ABA Journal. I do have my own blog where I speak for myself, but nobody reads it, and I make no money off it. So,
thanks a lot. And Victoria.
Hey, everyone. My name is Victoria Hudgins. I'm a reporter at Legal Tech News, which is owned by ALM, where I cover primarily cybersecurity, tech in the legal industry, and I'm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And last but not least, Zach.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Zach Warren. I'm also with Legal Tech News. You'll also find me elsewhere on ALM, which includes the law.com barometer newsletter that is now weekly, and I just happened to write this week, as well as ALM's flagship podcast, Legal Speak, in which I also happen to be the lead interview this week. So check some things out. Yeah, it's plug week for me.
And a couple of our usuals are not here this week. Caroline Hill is off on some vacation fun, I guess. And Joe Patrice is off coaching a debate team. And Molly McDonough is not feeling well. So send her best wishes and hope she's back here next week. So I thought we would give Steve the newbie advantage or the newbie courtesy and let him kick things off with something he wrote about this week. So Steve, take it away.
Sure. And I thought you were going to say I had to sing a fight song or something. You initiate.
I am still kicking myself that I didn't make everybody wear a costume this week. But,
Well, I'm glad you didn't make me sing. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I did a piece earlier this week about an agreement between the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation and the National Bar Association. And actually, I'd never heard of the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation before, but was surprised to find that they do a lot of really good things. And of course, the National Bar Association is a very large association, primarily of African-American attorneys, and has some judges in it. And so the two of them have linked up to try to create and develop some projects to combat racism and racial inequality in the United States, and to put together some election safeguard kits and training tools. I don't know that they'll get that done before next week, which would be nice, but I was really surprised to learn that the foundation has done a lot of things and created a lot of projects. They created an app designed to authenticate video atrocities that could occur, so the person can take a video and it's date stamped, time stamped, location stamped, then uploaded to LexisNexis servers where it's maintained for future reference without any ability for anybody to trace that video back to who actually took it. They've also been involved in some lobbying efforts throughout the United States, for human trafficking, model human trafficking laws, which is a ongoing problem. They've worked with the United Nations to develop some frameworks for to encourage businesses to support the rule of law. And the interesting thing about it, I spent some time with Ian McDougall, who is the president of the foundation. He's also general counsel of LexisNexis, really interesting guy. And he was saying, the foundation doesn't really sponsor stuff as much as it does create projects to help people kind of in a practical sort of sense. And, I thought about that, and he went on to say, we're not doing this to get our name out there, because most everybody knows who LexisNexis is. That really matters to us. It's just sort of we think it's the right thing to do. And skeptical me with my lawyer training put on what's the angle here for a while. I racked my brain for a while, and I really couldn't come up with a whole lot of mercenary kind of motive for LexisNexis to be doing this, other than it may appeal to people they may be trying to recruit, but that want to work for companies that have a social justice kind of end of things. And that's pretty indirect. And I'd actually thought about it. I thought, well, if LexisNexis dropped this program tomorrow, it probably wouldn't impact the bottom line whatsoever. So I really believed Ian when he was saying we are sort of doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I got a fair amount of clicks on it, a fair amount of comments, and people were like, it's nice to have a good story about something, particularly right now, and just got a whole lot of good going on. And the rule of law is pretty important. They have a real interesting tracking device on their website where they assess various countries' devotion to the rule of law about some various categories, and then they go on to assess how that correlates with certain metrics like gross domestic product or crime or infant mortality. And interestingly enough, should be obvious, but the more committed a country is to the rule of law, the higher they score in all of those things, which is really interesting when you get down to infant mortality and even life expectancy. And of course, we're like to say in this country, we're devoted to the rule of law. And I think in large part, the rule of law has helped us flourish as an economic powerhouse. And I think what they're doing sort of supports that in a lot of ways. But so it's fun to write, and it was fun to talk to Ian. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had a chance to talk with him. He was a cool guy, and really, really passionate about what he's doing with the foundation.
Anybody have thoughts on that? Or
yeah, I thought I was just looking at it just now. It's definitely interesting. I never really thought about the correlation between having a strong rule of law and having higher life expectancy, higher GDP, that kind of stuff. But it makes sense. I mean, if you have, a strong rule of law, that would tend to, I guess thinking about it, it would make sense that those would there'd be a correlation there. Like, so it was nice to see that data in front of me. I thought it was interesting that I guess the United States was lower than certain other countries, as particularly like in our continent, and also in Europe and whatnot. But I guess that I'd be interested to look at, sort of like what the index the trend of the index over the last decade, to see where we were 10 years ago as opposed to where we are now. So I don't know if they have that data, but I'd be fascinated to learn about that.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking that the very same thing, and wished I would have asked Ian about that, because that would be kind of interesting to see it. They're making a strong push to make a business case for it, to try to get business to support it, which of course, makes a lot of sense because for businesses, they can, if there's some certainty so that they can predict what's going to happen as a business, they can deal with almost anything. And if you have a process where that you can get disputes adjudicated in a fair way so that you can predict things, it really makes your business viability a whole lot better. So, particularly now, I mean, and I've talked about this in various posts where I think given the access to justice problem in this country, we've got so many people that really have no concept of what the rule of law means, and don't see its importance. And it's fundamentally important, to our economic viability. And so, yeah, it would be interesting to see, Victor, how that trend has gone. I have my suspicions, but I won't voice them.
Oh no, I have my suspicions too. That's why I asked that question. So, who knows? Maybe we're both wrong.
Yeah, could be.
I think it's interesting that I think we often tend to think of particularly the larger corporations that we buy services from as greedy big corporations, or at least profit-driven big corporations, and it's good to see them giving back in this kind of a way. Thomson Reuters has something also that they call the Thomson Reuters Foundation, which does things like has a global pro bono program and deals with various programs to promote social and environmental change around the world. And these things do tend to probably, we probably don't do enough to highlight the good programs that some of these companies are doing. So good for you, Steve, for writing about that.
Yeah, and like I say, I was really encouraged by how many people sort of liked it and actually read it and looked at it, and that was kind of neat. Other people sort of enjoyed seeing that kind of good news for a change.
Yeah.
I would always kind of wonder with these types of eyewitness to atrocities, that type of app, how do they make sure that the people that may actually deal with the instances of violence or atrocities, I think, that they actually know that that's available to them. And I always think that's kind of one of the issues that these types of legal tech apps or software they have. It's kind of okay, us in the legal tech world or those kind of in research, we understand, but the people that may actually be dealing with this, they don't know if it's maybe not in a commercial or heavily shared on Facebook or something like that. So that's always the one thing I'm always considering, how are they making sure people that actually need this type of help know that it's available.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I didn't even know that there was a rule of law foundation at all, much less that they had apps like this. So if I didn't know it, and I'm reasonably keep up with what's going on, I think I try to, how would the users that have no connection to it, how would they know it? But particularly I guess here in the United States and everywhere for that matter.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, moving on. Zach, I don't know if you want to talk about that interesting lawsuit that you guys talked about this week.
Before we move on real quick, I just wanted to point to the chat as well. We did get one person going in who does know the foundation, who says that Ian works with the local NGOs to get the word out. So just,
that's good.
One note about that. It's good taking the next step to make sure that anything that is happening is applicable, of course. So with that, I will go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum and be the pessimist here and talk about lawsuits. Earlier this week, Dan Packle, one of my colleagues at the American Lawyer, wrote about how the corpse of LeClairRyan sued UnitedLex, an ALSP that I think a lot of us here know, for, I believe it was $128 million, basically saying that there was a highly publicized outsourcing agreement between the two, and LeClairRyan alleges that everything that UnitedLex was doing essentially pushed them even further into bankruptcy than they originally were. The original agreement was supposed to be something that was helping them dig out of the hole by outsourcing pretty much all of their back office stuff. LeClairRyan says, no, UnitedLex didn't go back on that agreement, but tried to adjust the agreement and played financial games that actually ended up hurting. So I thought it was interesting more than anything else, because the lawsuit or the partnership in the beginning was very highly publicized. A lot that UnitedLex around that time they were doing was very, very highly publicized. I can't speak today. It's Friday afternoon. So just from the follow-up standpoint, I find it interesting, but also especially because I've been doing a lot of reporting around alternative legal service providers. And one thing that keeps popping up for me is, man, if just one bad experience happens to a major law firm, that spreads and people start to get skittish about new law alternative legal service providers as an entire category because of a bad experience like that. Could, especially a major lawsuit like this, have negative ramifications for people adopting that sort of alternative legal service provider model? Very speculative at this point, of course, and there's, I'm sure, a lot to come out with a lawsuit, but I do find it very interesting.
When I first saw it, and I read Dan's article too, and I kind of immediately went off well, how are they ever going to prove that? Because LeClairRyan had lots of problems. But then it dawned on me that it's really not a lawsuit by LeClairRyan; it's the bankruptcy trustee. And so a lot of the lawsuit is not, did you cause LeClairRyan to go down? Is, did you get money from the bankrupt LeClairRyan that was preferential, and now you have to pay back to the benefit of the other creditors. So you get into all these corporate kind of issues. And one of the things that could have an impact, I think, is the way that deal was structured, where they were joint venturers and what they were doing. So what does that mean when you start thinking about law firm ownership and ownership stakes in law firms, and are those ethical violations of the non-ownership rules, and where does that take you? And so there's a lot of issues that are kind of unique to bankruptcy in that case. That first of all, I should say, well, I'm not sure how much general applicability it does, but it could have a huge applicability. I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer. I know one time in my early career, I thought I would become one. And I went to a seminar and walked out and I said, these people aren't even speaking English. What are they talking about? But it'd be interesting to see how that plays out, in terms of sort of the ownership kind of payments and monies and all that flow through.
Yeah. And it sounds like from what I read in the article, it's not necessarily a cautionary tale about ALSPs. It's rather a cautionary tale about faltering law firms making bad business deals in the first place, because it sounded like LeClairRyan was already in trouble before it even entered into this. I remember when this happened, it was much ballyhooed, much touted as a new model for law firms partnering with an ALSP, but it sounds in fact like it was more like an attempt for LeClairRyan to throw itself a lifeline in a sense from what was already a bad situation.
I've been following the LeClairRyan affair for a little while. One of my reporters wrote a really good feature about kind of looking at everything and whatnot. And they were like, I think they missed budget like several times leading up to their demise. They had all kinds of problems with like payments to partners and things like that. So they were definitely, UnitedLex wasn't, I don't know if that was meant to try to save them or to give them a lifeline or whatnot, but they were never going to come in and say and rescue the firm or anything like that. So so on the one hand, it's kind of unfair to say like, okay, well, maybe the joint ventures thing isn't going to work out with other firms because it failed with LeClairRyan. Because I feel like LeClairRyan had plenty of problems that they were kind of shielding or kind of that weren't known to the general public. That this deal was never going to work out. But I do think it's interesting how, and I've I noticed that there's talk about the Paul Snelly thing at the end. That seems like that was more of like a step backward as far as like, this is not a joint venture. This is just us taking on the back office stuff. We're doing we have very limited participation with this firm. Maybe that's just how they felt what they felt was comfortable for them at this point. But yeah, I do think it's interesting how their follow up to the LeClairRyan thing was to kind of take a little step back and go, okay, well let's. And I don't know the circumstances behind that deal, but I do think it's interesting how that went down.
Yeah. Any other comments on that? We can transition to more law firm bad news. Victor, you had a story this week of another law firm.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been hearing quite a bit about like law firm layoffs. Some of them have been publicized. Some of them have been kind of stealth. But kind of what struck me was the fact that this was Kirkland. It's Kirkland and Ellis conducting layoffs, and Above the Law reported this and whatnot. And I guess we're still waiting for all the details about that. But it seemed just the fact that it was Kirkland kind of struck me, because it's like, well, this is a firm that's supposed to be, the biggest firm in the country as far as like gross revenue. They've been number one for I think the last several years. I could be wrong, but it's either been them or I think Latham. And they had a much like ballyhooed like couple of years where they were bringing in all these big name partners, paying them tons of money, and then expanding like very rapidly some of their practice areas. And it seemed like they either knew what they were doing, or they were they had so much money that it didn't matter, that they could take chances and whatnot. And now here they are laying people off. So I do wonder what the final bill on that is going to be, and how that's going to shake out, and the effects that that'll have on other firms that maybe aren't as that don't have that kind of pedigree, that don't have that kind of money behind it. So I just find that interesting.
Well, part of what's interesting, I think, is the timing, and because the conventional wisdom, or at least what people who work at big firms or work with big firms keep telling me, is that they are all on the rebound and have been for a month or two now anyway, if not a couple of months, that they all saw, drops in their business in the immediate months following mid-March, when all hell broke loose. And some firms did layoffs, May, June. But a lot of firms are saying their business has been turning around, things have been coming back, and and some of them are even in fact saying they're going to have very good years in 2020 overall. So the fact that it's happening this late into the game is interesting to me.
I wonder if some of it sort of indirectly stems from a new analysis that a lot of firms are going through with respect to office space and how much they really need. And so, it's one thing to say we're gonna start hoteling partners and they're not going to have a fancy office. Another thing to say, maybe we could reduce our office footprint, and do we really need all those people in the marketing department? And maybe we don't, so we can jettison some of them and save space. And so I wonder if it may be that kind of analysis more than, we're making a lot of money, but of course our biggest expense for law firms is salaries, and the second is real estate. So those two, when they start looking at them together, I wonder if some of them are making those kinds of analysis. It's a shame, because those are the people that need the work the most, right? I mean, it's not the $1 million partner at the corner office. It's the administrative assistant that's working, trying to make ends meet. But yeah,
that's what I was going to suggest as well. That it was a combination of reconsideration of office space needs, but also, fingers crossed, let's hope maybe they're also adopting new technologies that are streamlining their efficiency a little bit, and they're realizing that with everyone working remotely, they're relying on those technologies a little more. And so perhaps they're realizing that some inefficiencies are, there's a lot of duplication of processes possibly, and then they're having to reduce people. So I wonder if that's also happening, because we all know COVID's pushed everyone about a decade ahead in terms of adoption of technology, cloud computing, and the processes that help them streamline their firm's workflow. So I wonder if that also factors into it a little bit.
Well, I will say the Above the Law article said that it was mostly staff members, assistants, paralegals, secretaries, admin, but also IT personnel. So, so
interesting.
So maybe it's not the tech for them, because you think that they would need people to be around to help explain things to the lawyers.
Well, the IT personnel, that sort of brings up this fundamental conflict between IT staff and the cloud, right? Because IT staff have traditionally maintained their biggest task in recent years has been maintaining the servers and dealing with all the conflicts as software is downloaded, and obviously the hardware as well that's on everybody's desks. But as you move into the cloud, their functions shift, and they're not maintaining the servers as much because the servers are being run and owned by third parties. So that may be a bit of a reflection of the reduction of IT staff, maybe the adoption of the cloud that we're seeing more often. And that's one of the things that Bob had written about that I thought was interesting, that I was going to mention later, was this sort of that trend of cloud adoption and some things.
You could mention it now while you're talking about it.
Well, one thing that I thought was really interesting was I spoke at Alt Legal and also attended a couple sessions there, but I also attended the Intapp conference as press. So they both had conferences this week, and Intapp's big announcement. And I've always been very interested in Intapp because I stumbled across their wine party years ago at wine and cheese tasting at Elta, and I've been sucked in ever since. Because then I thought they were super interesting, but that wine and cheese was totally sucked me in. But they actually have a very interesting approach.
I'm glad you have your priorities straight.
So for all you people who want coverage from Nikki, just remember she.
Just all about the wine and cheese.
Everyone send wine and cheese to Nikki and she'll cover you guys.
Yeah. About 10 people in the audience just signed Nikki up for a Wine of the Month club.
Oh, well, that'd be nice. But then I just talked my way into that party once I walked by it at ILTA years ago. But then I followed, met with them over the years, and I attended a few sessions of that conference. And their big announcement that you wrote about, Bob, was that they're shifting all of their software into the cloud. And I think and they've always traditionally served the larger firm and possibly mid-sized market, but really larger firms. And that's sort of this indication of this decade's push. I'm sure they'd planned to do that, but this idea that COVID has accelerated things to such an extent that some of these companies are making these business decisions that we're going all cloud. And that's going to force the customers all cloud, but it has got to be partially driven by the fact that their customers began to look at those cloud products because of COVID earlier than they'd planned as well. So I do think that we're seeing this. And I think the fact that there's a surge happening now and that this is going to be a long winter, I think as soon as the election's over, a lot of businesses, law firms and other businesses are going to sort of reassess and come up with this 6-month plan, because it's pretty clear that the surge is happening and there's going to be this back and forth between being in the office and then going back to remote. And they need to create some sort of resiliency plan to address that. And cloud is often the best solution for that.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine we are not, firmly on a path to close to 100% cloud at some point. Although I was talking to Andy Klein at Rain & Court just this morning, who was saying, I mean, there are still a lot of their customers, and they're dealing with really big firms, are still pretty firmly entrenched in their I don't know if you call it on premises, because it's not really on premises, but their on premises environment in the loose sense of that word. This is going to take a while, I think, for it to change entirely. But
well, that's what I found interesting about Intaps too, because I spoke with them also. And one thing they told me is, yeah, we were thinking about doing this anyway, but the whole reason we're making a super public push was actually the customers asked us to. They want backup internally saying, hey, this is a big company who's making this move. We want to be able to go along with them. Hey, internal buy-in. Come, please, like stakeholders, help us move to the cloud. So Intapp saying, yeah, we wanted to be a partner in that way too, just the whole change management of it. I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
I saw the announcement too and went to some of the Intapp sessions, and frankly, it didn't dawn on me that sort of like that would be an issue, because, once I got away from the law firm, use of the cloud seemed to be so normal, right? But then I reflected back when I was practicing law with the firm, there was a lot of pushback to any notion of going to the cloud, and to the point that there'd be this sort of guerrilla warfare with partners, refusing to put stuff in the cloud and keeping it, on premises so they could somehow have access to it. And frankly, there was also a confusion about what that meant, right? I mean, there were a lot of lawyers who didn't understand the difference between having all your files at the time the firm was using NetDocs, having everything in NetDocs versus having everything on premises. And they didn't understand that was something different and something good. Which, lawyers never take the time to understand that kind of stuff anyway. So yeah, I guess for a lot of firms and a lot of lawyers, it's still a big issue, which is just sort of amazes me still. I guess I've been out of the law firm long enough that I'm like, what? You're not going to go to the cloud? What?
Right. Well, and that's one thing I think we're going to talk about the ABA tech report at some point. But the thing that's always interested me about the ABA's legal technology survey report is that they will have a question, how many of you use the cloud for work-related purposes? And the numbers are always, they have gone up increasingly every year. They were plateaued at 30% for a while. Now I think they're up to 58%. But that should be, knowingly use the cloud, because when I've spoken at conferences, I'll ask the room, like, how many of you use cloud computing? And 4 lawyers used to raise their hand about 5 years ago. Then I'll say, how many of you use Dropbox? And half the room would raise their hand. I'm like, oh, for God's sake. You don't even know you're in the cloud. They honestly just don't understand. And, if your client emails you and they use a Gmail account and you respond with confidential client information, you understand that that confidential client data is now in the cloud, correct? And most lawyers will look at you bewildered, and then they start to get a little shocked, and then they panic. But lawyers have been using the cloud and they don't understand that they're in it. I think now that knowledge is they're starting to realize that, but it's taken a long time, and now they're starting to realize that there's a lot of benefits, especially with COVID and working remote.
Yeah, it was sort of like, I don't know what the cloud is, but I don't like it.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with that ABA tech survey has been that they have, in order to be able to compare year against year, they've been trying to try and keep the questions they ask very similar from year to year. But some of the questions are starting to get out of date because they've been doing it so long, or some of them were already out of date because they've been doing it for so long. And they really need to, I think, do a kind of a complete overhaul of the questions they're asking in that survey to reflect where we are in this point of time. And the ones about the cloud are often some of the ones that seem to be, they're written probably around the time you wrote your book, Nikki, or something. It's an earlier understanding of the cloud.
And like Victor, I guess I should say, since I'm involved in the law practice division, my opinions in no way reflect the law practice division or the LTRC or the ABA either. But one of the things about the survey that is interesting is it covers this broad spectrum of lawyers. And so you have to be careful about the conclusions that you draw from it. So, you could say, well, the big law firms are using the cloud computing more, but you've got 2 respondents from big law firms, right? So you really have to kind of parse the demographics down of what it is skewed more toward solo and small law firms, I think.
Right.
Because
which is a perfect segue for Victoria, because she actually wrote about the ABA tech survey this week. So Victoria, what did you see? What did you read?
Yeah, last week I wrote 2 articles about the ABA tech report, and there were like Nikki, and the cloud adoption is always a weird response where people say, I don't use the cloud, but then you see so many people use Dropbox or Gmail, and it's that is the cloud, but I guess they view it differently. But one of the things I thought was kind of interesting was the low uses of project management software. And even among larger law firms, which I kind of assume they would use project management software because they maybe deal with more larger litigation, but the adoption was fairly low. And I spoke to some law firms about that. Well, one law firm consultant about that. And she just said that the project management software is too clunky and that lawyers just kind of don't need the certain type of information that those software can provide. And one other source at another law firm at Fisher and Phillips, I believe it was, she said that sometimes it is still clunky for some law firms, and sometimes the lawyers' clients request that they use a specific type of project management software. So they use that, but they won't use what's provided by the law firm. And someone at Reed Smith, she was pretty adamant that yes, lawyers use project management software. They just maybe don't know that they're actually using it when they are using it. So I thought that was kind of interesting in her. When I asked her, well, she told me that more lawyers will probably be using project management software as they deal with more lawyers start working with like your alternative legal service providers and the use of technology. They'll have to keep track of more players in their litigation, that the use of software will be needed to track like the deadlines, who's taking care of what, who was assigned to what. So it'd be interesting to see if like lawyers actually figure out like, yeah, I actually am using project management software, and if we'll start to see an incline on that. And I also wrote about legal tech purchases, and specifically finding out that legal staff feedback can like kill a deal. Like if they're not the ones writing the check, of course, at the law firm, but the law firms always, outside of like solo practitioners, legal staff feedback was like the leading resource in making a legal tech purchase decision. And from speaking to small law and, well, no, I didn't get around to speaking to small law firms, but mid-sized and large law firms, they also said that they turn to their staff for feedback on like a proposed technology that, you know, they may be getting a demo on or considering implementing, because it's the staff that has the, they're on the ground actually using the technology. They know the ins and outs. They know when certain things would maybe be a little bit more inefficient or provide efficiencies. So they definitely take their feedback at heart. And one, I think he was a law firm CIO, he did say you kind of have to weigh. Some people just don't like change, but it's just kind of like if all of your staffers that you go to maybe take part in the demo, if they're saying like, no, this isn't good, it wouldn't help us at all, that could most likely that legal tech company wouldn't get that sell at that law firm. So it's interesting to see, even in large law firms, the number was really high. Like you have to reach out to your staff to see like what they need and let them see the product or talk to them about the legal technology to see like, would it actually be helpful or would it not be helpful?
Yeah. On the issue of the project management software, I thought that was interesting. But I wonder whether again, that's an issue of how do you define what project management software is, because increasingly, I mean, for example, a number of practice management programs or contract management programs are introducing process management or, you know, sort of process automation that in a way are almost like project management. It's like a case comes in the door and then you plug it into a sort of a set of somewhat automated tasks in the practice management program that walk you through, you know, in a not entirely literal sense, but somewhat literal sense. They walk you through the steps of how you handle that case or move that case forward from the time a client first contacts you about a potential matter all the way through, you know, taking it to trial or whatever. And I wonder if those kind of process automation programs are serving as a kind of a substitute for what would be project management in other contexts.
Yeah, and that's definitely what I think the project manager at Reed Smith, what she was getting at, that like these types of software can be integrated or processes integrated into various software that lawyers just don't know that they're actually using the a project management software, but they are using it. So it is kind of interesting. It's kind of like wondering the wording, like when you see the question, what did respondents think? And it's kind of like maybe that made up the responses a little bit.
Yeah.
Which that assumes that lawyers know what project management is, which is
right.
Not an entirely safe assumption sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I did want to throw out there before I forgot about the tech report, I don't understand why they don't talk about wearable tech and the types of wearable technology lawyers use. Smartwatches, at least. I keep waiting for them to provide statistics on that because I've always been really interested in it from the moment they came out. The Apple Watch. I predicted in an article that I wrote way back when it first came out that seems like a long time ago. It was probably just a couple of years ago, but that I thought lawyers would really, especially women lawyers, would want to start using Apple Watches for the notification settings in particular. And these days I noticed that half the lawyers in the room are wearing smartwatches. I don't think that's necessarily an exaggeration at this point. So I would love to actually see the statistics rather than a bunch of lawyers at a tech conference, which is a little bit skewed. So
they do have they actually, I just looked real quick. They do have a question. They asked them about smart wearables. Let's see.
I Googled, I just searched the document and it looked like it was somehow based. It wasn't necessarily the smart wearable the way that we're thinking about it. I looked at that before I spoke to make sure that, because I haven't read the entire report, but I might have not looked carefully enough. When I did see that, it's like in an index, right? Smart wearable.
Yeah, it was about break down the types of devices used regularly and occasionally by respondents when conducting legal research.
Yeah, that's what was strange.
Yeah, that was a little bit weird. Why not just wear smart tech while you're just working? But yeah, okay.
I don't know how you even use your watch for research. There must be something I'm missing out on. I don't know. Does anyone ever use
maybe that question was written when everyone thought Google Glass was going to be the next big thing, and then that way you could just like look things up like with your glasses, and then they just
I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
That's my wish. I want to throw out there. I'd love that statistic somewhere.
Yeah. Have we gone all the way around except to me, or Nikki? Did you have was there something else you wanted to talk about, or? Your article on analytics. That was really good. Yeah. That was a really good article.
My ABA article every month, I write about a different kind of software. And this year I've been revisiting the 2018 articles that I wrote because a lot changes in 2 years in legal tech. And so I wrote about litigation analytics tools in 2018, and this was my sort of revamp. And it's interesting. I think the thing that really stood out to me was the people that own the data are doing some of the most data are doing some of the most creative stuff with that data. So and LexisNexis in particular always really interests me because they've made some investments and some acquisitions, and they're doing a lot with context and Lex Machina. But Bloomberg and Thomson Reuters also are doing a lot with certain aspects of litigation analytics. And then there's a bunch of other companies that have been around for a few years now that do this, and they're all adding more and more databases and more types of legal analytics, which is as they get their hands on more data. And Fastcase has Docket Alarm. They acquired that company. So there's a lot of companies investing in trying to take advantage of the efficiencies and the access to information, efficiencies at least in terms of mining all that data and making sense of it, and the access to information that previously it was available, but it would have taken human eyes far too long to parse through it and make sense of it. So it's just interesting to see the growth in that space and the different companies as they enlarge their databases and provide different types of reporting capabilities.
Yeah, I think
I'll add a link. I don't think I did that. I'll do that now.
LexisNexis, they just got the state court data from Manhattan, was it, I think? And I think they've got a few other not entire states, but localized states. And I always thought that's the holy grail of data analytics, right? Because there's so much litigation, at least litigation analytics. It's all, most of it's in state court, and that's where most lawyers practice. And yet it's the hardest nut to crack because of the way it's structured or not structured, I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's not easily accessible. And that was Gavalytics was the other one that announced this week that by the end of the year they'll have data from 20 state courts. Not all of the data from all of the courts in those states, but they did say they would have for the 20 states. They'll at least have all the major metropolitan court data for those 20 states. So that's pretty significant. They're doing some cool stuff too. I think, they started out as being just judge analytics in California, and now they're doing lawyer and law firm and litigant analytics. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how they evolve and what they do with what they've got. That's a whole area that really fascinates me. I mean, I've probably said this before here, but in some ways I think some of what's happening with analytics is almost really more interesting than some of what's happening with AI, despite all the buzz about AI and legal, because the analytic stuff is just so directly practical and transferable in terms of what a lawyer does in court or otherwise. Some of the litigation analytics can be really useful and directly applicable, whereas some of the AI stuff in some of the contexts is still pretty abstruse and remote. But
I guess I would be remiss if I didn't point out at this point that there's still a dispute between Bob and I. That's who said not using litigation data analytics could be malpractice. And I swear it was him. I didn't say it. I copied it from him.
But I wrote an article attributing the quote to you, and Steve said, "No, you said it."
But one of us said it. Right?
One of us said it. We both agree on that point. Anyway.
I think my next point actually just got sniped by the chat, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Going back to my old days of baseball broadcasting, it reminds me so much of the Moneyball argument.
Yeah.
Whether it's going to be data centric for those litigators that really lean into the analytics and say, oh, I don't want to be before this judge because she has a 30% success rate versus this one that has a 50, versus the old school, do it by feel. I've been doing this for a while, have the wealth of knowledge, and I want to rely on that knowledge. I think the sweet spot is probably somewhere in between, but I am curious whether there is going to be that back and forth.
Well, because I mean, just even watching baseball, I stopped watching baseball for a long time, but just watching the World Series, like in Game 6 when they took out Blake Snell after he was this might be a little too inside baseball, so to speak, but Tampa took out their starting pitcher, even though he was on a 2-hitter in the 6th inning, because they have stats that show that, okay, if we go to our flame throwing relief pitchers in these situations, they have a higher percentage of success rate as opposed to just leaving the starting pitcher in. Whereas the old school people are like, just leave him in. He was cruising. He only gave up 2 hits. He was, mowing down everybody that he faced. Why not just let him keep going until he can't throw anymore, and then bring in your bullpen. So I definitely see a little bit of that going, because one thing that we've seen as just in covering the legal industry is that lawyers, especially litigators, like to say, well, there's nothing that replaces a good advocate. There's nothing that replaces a good trial lawyer. I can do things that that can't be predicted by the stats. I can do things that don't apply to what's happened before. And I definitely see that you have arguments to be made on both sides of the equation, but probably like Zach was saying, that there probably is a sweet spot in the middle where you can use the stats to inform what you do without just saying, okay, well, I'm not going to look at the stats because I know better than anybody else.
I think it's so.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just think it's so entertaining that the men and presumably women that are interested in baseball immediately go to this analogy, because there was a, Zach brought up, and there was Above the Law article that talked about the same thing. And it's so funny to me because that Above the Law article, I was like, oh, great, legal analytics. And I was like, well, baseball. And I had the hardest time getting, where's the good stuff? But you guys are all super into it. So it's funny how there's just it's a different way of looking at the exact same thing. But you guys all, your eyes all lit up at this analogy.
Yeah, well, Josh Becker we can blame Josh Becker at Lex Machina, because I think he was the one who started calling it Moneyball for lawyers a few years back, or I don't know, maybe he didn't, but he used it all the time. And,
it's really it's kind of an issue that's multifaceted. I was on the Three Geeks podcast, I guess Thursday, and we were talking about
my second favorite podcast.
We were talking about the need for young associates to be in the presence of the almighty partner in order to learn how to be a lawyer. And, I was saying, well, because the first problem is we don't know what we're training for. What does it mean to be a good lawyer, right? I mean, and again, to use the baseball analogy, it was, if you remember from Moneyball, you had all these baseball executives saying, "Oh, he looks like a ball player, right? He's good." But he looks like a lawyer. Well, that just means he looks like, old white guy. He looks like a lawyer, right? And so, I mean, and my point on the show was, rather than saying you have to be physically present with a partner to learn how to be a good lawyer, why don't we first say, what does it mean to be a good lawyer, and then train to that? Let's use some data and some statistical analysis and define what it is we mean when we say Bob is a good and successful lawyer, right? And let's reach some agreement on that and then train to that, as opposed to saying, oh, let's let Bob go be the apprentice to somebody else that's older and supposedly wiser, which may or may not be the case. And so it's the use of the data across the board in law is so many areas for improvement. I think if we just get beyond this sort of notion of, oh, I intuitively know, or I know from experience, or,
Yeah.
I did, over my years, I did enough jury research to know, and maybe I'm just not very intuitive, but a lot of times what I thought a jury would do turned out to be wrong.
Right. The other issue is that of clients using data to try and determine who is a good lawyer, looking at the court data. I know, Nikki, you wrote about, is it prevalent? Not prevalent. What's one of the companies that really focus on the clients, taking this court data to the clients? But there again, I mean, it's, a win-loss ratio does not tell you whether somebody's a good lawyer or not. You could be one of the best lawyers in the world if you're constantly taking on really tough cases or really challenging cases, because that's what interests you. You might have a horrible win-loss ratio, but still be a brilliant litigator. Same goes for judges. I mean, judges who are frequently overturned on appeal, it might be not that they're bad judges, it might be because that they're willing to push the law and make decisions that stretch the boundaries a little bit.
I think the better predictor, and I hired a lot of local counsel over the years because of the kind of work that I was doing. The thing that I would be more interested in than one loss ratio is how many cases has this lawyer tried to verdict? And because I was always amazed that the number of lawyers, when it came time to be local counsel for a matter, who would swear that they had tried 50 cases in front of Judge so-and-so. Well, you could tell by, talking to him for a while, this probably wasn't true, but there was no way to check that. How would you know? We call up the judge. Yeah, right. Yeah. So just that piece, that piece of information is critical, not only from the lawyer you might hire, but the lawyer on the other side. How many cases have they tried? Yep.
And this conversation is interesting using the monkey ball, looking at statistics and everything from a law firm's perspective, because I wrote about ShiftHard. They released a claim simulation tool where they can, and I thought it was interesting how they actually built the software, because it is tech. And I asked the lawyer that helped develop it, and I asked them what type of data did they use? Did they use any type of public data to see how a claim could perhaps, the likelihood certain claims would go to maybe what would be the verdicts, or would the verdict be for the plaintiff or the defense, or would the settlement be kind of high? And he said he actually didn't rely on any public data because court data is very biased, because a lot of matters never even make it to court or to a verdict. And said he relied on ShiftHard and lawyers that had expertise in that asked them what's the likelihood this outcome could happen, or what would be the good or the worst case scenario for this type of claim. And he used technology to scale it to different combinations. And that's how they figure out the statistics. So I thought it was an interesting use of using technology to scale a lawyer's expertise. And his claim I thought was really interesting about the biased data and court data. And I think you might think court data, if someone was found guilty or not, or the penalties and everything like that, that's not biased, but it's interesting here from this law firm, that actually is. But just trying to rely on just their lawyers or their top partners, their expertise. They're trying to spread that around and kind of like scale it with the use of technology. So it'd be interesting to see like how law firms go about that. Will they just turn to public data and say like, hey, we'll just throw AI at it? Or how will they deal with that? That'd be interesting. So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's a good. And also, I mean, I think also, you know, they're not necessarily looking at like loss data and like that kind of stuff too. Like very often, especially with like law firms and companies, you know, sometimes they just want to say, okay, look, if I'm in front of Judge X and it takes him or her like, you know, 3 months before they'll even consider like a motion, like a motion to dismiss or a motion for a directive for whatever, summary judgment. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. Or you know, like once they make a decision, it takes them an average of like, or once they hear the case, it takes them an average of like 4, 5, 6 months before they release their decision. Or you know, like based on the past, like they're not likely to give to give out a lot of summary judgment motions. So we're probably going to have to try the case or at least get to the jury selection phase. So then you can at least, you know, start to ballpark, okay, well, if I'm in front of just this judge based on the history, I'm probably going to, you know, budget for like this much time, you know, based on our history, you know, and our billing, we can offer a client this much and it won't be like a huge burden on us and it won't be a huge burden on them. So as far as like the analytics go in that sense, I understand like the business sense as far as like, you know, using that kind of precedent to kind of guide what you're going to do as far as like pricing, as far as budgeting and things like that. So I think that, you know, like that does have like a legitimate business purpose as far as like using the data that's available.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of the hour here. I just wanted to mention one other story I thought was notable this week was the Priori Legal raise of $6.3 million. They're a legal marketplace, mostly serving larger corporations these days. They actually started out serving small businesses. That was their target market, providing outside lawyers to small businesses. But they pivoted over the years, probably because that's where the money is, and started serving large corporations mostly. So, you know, providing law firm lawyers to big legal departments. I mean, they said this has been a record year for them. Probably not surprisingly in the era of the pandemic. But what was notable about it is in part simply that these are two women founders of a successful legal tech company, because unfortunately that is still something that is relatively rare in legal tech. It is still rare that there are women founders or founders who are people of color in legal tech. And the fact that there are actually two founders at this company who are both women with a great kind of a great backstory in that they met in law school and went on to found this company together. So congratulations to them, and it's good to see them having success.
Yeah, one story that I thought was kind of fun with them is last time that they did a funding round, both of them were pregnant while doing the funding round. And then this time they started to kick one off again. And then Basha, one of the co-founders, got pregnant for a second time. So did a second funding round while pregnant. And then pandemic, of course, on top of that. So she was joking with me, man, I'm scared if I get pregnant for a third time, what's going to happen here?
A lot more money, maybe, I guess. I don't know how that works, but.
Well, and even though MyCase was founded by men, but our CEOs, well, she was running, she's the CEO now after the carve out. Now that we were acquired, but Kim's been running MyCase for years now, and she's our CEO now. So I'll point that out.
Yeah, no, but it's still Kristen Sunday did a recent survey, sort of an informal survey, Kristen Sunday of Paladin back in 2018. And if I'm trying to remember, I think it was something like only 13% of legal tech founders were women at that point, some very small percentage. Somebody else did a survey last year on the legal tech companies that got financing of any kind, and how many of those had women as founders or CEOs. And again, the numbers were really small. So it's probably gotten better since then, but I think Kristen, I don't think Kristen is on here, but I know she's working on updating the numbers, but I think she said it hasn't gotten all that much better in terms of the overall numbers. So it's still something to think about. But all right, well, we are out of time, and thanks to Steve for joining in this week, and thanks to all of you for being part of this, and everybody in the audience for watching and listening. We'll be back next Friday with a new president, or
Don't jinx
we'll
it.
know the president.
Don't jinx it.
Or we won't even know the president. Who knows what we'll know. We'll be back next Friday anyway. There will not be any president part of our panel, I can tell you that.
All right.
All right.
Great
See y'all.
weekend, all.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.